On Law Weekly today, we bring you another perspective on the legislation changing the name of the Nigerian Prison Service into the Nigerian Correctional Service. We talked to a senior advocate of Nigeria, Mr. Chino Obiagwu. Mr. Obiagwu is the national coordinator of the Legal Defense and Assistance Project, LEDAP, a non-governmental organization of lawyers and law professionals engaged in the promotion and protection of human rights, the rule of law, and good governance in the country. LEDAP has done extensive work providing legal representation to the poor and vulnerable victims of human rights violation and works with the directors of prosecution to improve the administration of criminal justice in the country. Also showing on the program, the Attorney General of the Federation, Abubakar Malami SAN, expresses concerns about the impact of public corruption and the connivance of financial institutions in the thriving crime of illicit finance flow out of the country. Plus our weekly recap of the top trending stories from the courtrooms. Hello and welcome to the program. I'm Shola Sheyeli. Last week on the show, we had the Attorney General and Commissioner for Justice in Ekiti State, Mr. Olawale Fapoda, give us his perspectives on the Nigerian Correctional Service Act of 2019. This week, we stay with the legislation, but we get another perspective. We look at the gaps, if any, in the legislation, especially against the background of what obtains internationally. But before we get into that discussion, I asked my guest, Mr. Chino Obiagwu, a senior advocate of Nigeria, to first give us his views on the assignment of portfolios to ministers. Does he think that round pegs have been put in round holes?
Well, many of the people that we know that performed creatively well were retained, and I think that's commendable, even though you may say a lawyer managing Ministry of Works or so and so, or a lawyer managing transportation, that they are not professionals in those areas. But I think they've done creatively well in setting the policy that would drive those ministries. So to that extent, the few ministers that we know were given proper portfolios. But we are still concerned that there are still for some critical portfolio that are not being, that our attention were not paid to, especially petroleum. Would you think that the petroleum should be an independent ministry handled by a full-time minister, because it's very critical? We commend the separation of power from housing, because power is important. Whether or not this regime brings power to Nigeria will be a test of their success. So we are hoping that change will be with respect to power in this country, because that's actually what is dragging us down in terms of development. And more than $1 trillion Naira has been put into power in the last 10 years, yet we are still battling with 3,000, 4,000 megawatts. So where did the money go? What do they use it for? So I think the critical search about anti-corruption should start from that bottomless pit called power sector. So much money has gone into that area, yet no improvement, not even a single megawatt of electricity. I remember that Obasanjo's regime told us that by 2020, we achieved 10,000 megawatts of electricity. That's next year. Yet, we've not even moved forward. In fact, we're actually moving backwards in terms of power. So something is definitely wrong. And I think the government must show credibility by identifying what is wrong in the power sector and fix it.
President Muhammadu Buhari recently assented to the bill changing the name of the Nigerian Prison Service into the Nigerian Correctional Service. What are your general thoughts about this legislation? I
think the legislation is commendable. It has taken us 18 years to get it done since 2001, when it was put in to amend the Prison Act, 1945. So now we have it. It makes a lot of very good provisions. Provisions, many of them are not very new. They're not new. I mean, non-custodial services has been in the Prison Act, has been in this Criminal Procedure Act. It's also in the Administration of Criminal Justice Act 2015, that when people are charged for or convicted for offenses that are not heinous, that they can be sentenced to community service or even suspended sentence or parole. In that way, not everybody should go to prison. These are provisions that are written in our law. But what the new law has done is to operationalize it, to give the prison the powers to fully make it functional, make it to work. And I think this is very commendable. Also, the change of name, correctional services, sends a signal, not just to the prison authorities, but also to the public, that prisons are not meant only for punishment. It's meant for reformation. So we expect that when people go to prison, They go there to be reformed. And then the correctional services should also set up what they call the halfway home and vocational training. So they come out, learn a trade, and be useful when they return to society. So I think it's a good way forward. But the government needs to put in money for it to be functional.
But would you say that this legislation is in tandem with what obtains internationally? Would you say that it has met best global practices?
I don't think so. I think we're still very far away from minimum standards for treatment of prisoners. We're still very far away. The law refers mainly to convicted persons, convicted prisoners. But you know that in our prisons, we have about 142 prison and lock-up places in this country, and 10 maximum security prisons that hold up above 500 persons. Now, out of this prison, only about 20% of the inmates are convicted prisoners. 70 to 80% are awaiting trials. And then, of course, out of this number, now we have a prison population of about 70,000 or so. Out of that, 1,500 are on death row, and most of them has been on death row for more than 10 years. Now, you see that the people that really congest the prison are not the convicted prisoners. As many, they are awaiting trials, and perhaps the death row, people who are convicted and sentenced to death, and of course, state governors are not executing. Now, what it means is that people who are awaiting trial remain in prison without being taken to court. And that's really below international standards. And I think this law has not taken care of that category of awaiting trial prison persons. Now, the Section 12 of the law provides that a prisoner, the head of a prison, can reject inmates sent to them by the courts. If that happens, where would the inmates go? Where would the court officials take those inmates to? Now, that's a problem. That has not been resolved. Now, the problem is a contradiction in our Constitution, because the judicial institutions, the courts, the prosecutors that try people and send them to prison are state institutions, while the prison is a federal institution. So the states have not been empowered to build their own detention centers, because prison is in the exclusive list of the Constitution. So until we resolve that constitutional contradiction, you're still going to begin to have that problem. It's not enough to say reject prisoners. Where would you take them to? Will you send them home? No, of course you cannot. Will you send them to the police station? No. So that statement must be resolved.
And that can only be done by way of constitutional amendment.
The true constitutional amendment, to allow states to begin to build their own prison. Another thing that new development international law is that people are beginning to look at and ensure that children are not detained along with adults. And of course, in this country, we don't have both two homes where children, a person under the age of 18, should be detained. At the moment, they're being held together with adults in prison, including females. So I think that's a major problem, and the prison authority should pay attention to issues of children in detention and persons with mental illness, because at the moment they're still being kept in the same place with adult prisoners.
And you say that the correctional service legislation has not addressed all of these issues.
Yeah, well, Correctional Services Bill has provided that there should be a separation of female and women prisons, not just a female wing, but the prison should be completely separated so that there will be proper treatment of female prisoners. It has also provided for treatment of mentally ill persons and proper handling. But these are provisions that will be functional if they are funded. I mean, in Nigeria, we have very good laws. I mean, but the point is that does the government have the political will to put in their money where the law is? And if they do, and the Correctional Services Act is implemented, I think we'll move closer to meeting international standards on treatment of prisoners.
I hear you talk a lot about funding. How much of an issue is the problem of funding of our prisons?
I don't think there's many prisons in this country, especially maximum security, that are bedded. So people still sleep on the bare floor. So the government has not really invested much on prisons. We're supposed to have halfway homes. So when people are sentenced to, say, 10 years and they stay 3/4 of that period, they should move to halfway homes, where they will now be prepared to move into the society. But we don't have halfway homes that are operational. I understand the prison authorities are building some halfway homes. And we do hope that they will come on board very soon. I think the present administration, the prison administration has been trying to build more prisons. There's a grant received from the British government on that. They're trying to bring more prisons, more modern prisons, so that some of the prisons we have now, like the Agodi prison was built in 1919. Most of them are built with mud walls. They have actually outlived their usefulness. So we must modernize our prison, or even think about privatizing prisons, which is being done other places in the world.
Can you give us a figure off the top of your head? How much should the government allocate to prison and prison reforms?
The government should invest at least 10 billion naira annually on capital and infrastructural development of the prisons. Because when the prison is properly managed, it will reduce the rate of recidivism. That's the rate at which people go to prison and come out and become hardened criminals. Because once people go to prison and come out and go again and come out, tendency is that the rate of criminality will become much more severe and much more hardened. So if the government puts in skill acquisition schemes in prisons, invests money to run educational services in prison, people will go to prison and come out better citizens. It becomes a reformatory center.
And will achieve that correctional.
Exactly. It will achieve the correctional services purpose. But once it's still punitive, people are just locked up and they just suffer in that very congested cells. They come out much more determined into criminality. So the society is worse off for it. I don't really think we need to build more prisons. I think what we need to do is to renovate the ones we have, make them more modern, put beds and better conditions of living there.
Finally, are there any other legislations that you think that the government can work on to aid the work of the correctional service legislation?
Yes, of course. The prison services or correctional services is just one arm of the criminal justice system. We have the courts, the prosecution, we have the police, we have the legal aid, we even have the private bar. They all work together towards the criminal justice system. So amending the Prison and Correctional Services Act is just one out of the whole lot. So the Administration of Criminal Justice Act 2015 is an important legislation that must work together with the Correctional Services Act for us to have a robust and improved criminal justice system, for which the prison is just part of. Again, when the Police Act needs to be amended, the bill to amend the Police Act was introduced to the House of National Assembly at the same time as the bill to amend the Prison Act. So we do hope the National Assembly should speed up on that and also amend the Police Act. It's important to amend the Police Act because it was, the last amendment was in like 1945. So it is important to update it. The police need to improve on their investigatory capacities. It is important to harmonize it with the Administration of Criminal Justice Act that provides time frame from arrest to charge and arraignment. The Police Act had to create those kind of time standards too, so that they can be properly managed. There's a situation where police will arrest someone and put them in detention forever without a legislative time frame for concluding investigation and charging the person to court. Is very, very bad because it creates this long detention. I mean, if you go to prisons, police stations, there are people who have been there for like months. And investigation is still going on and so on. So that is really very wrong. The second issue is about legal aid. The Legal Aid Council of Nigeria Act provides that there should be compulsory legal services, free legal services for people who cannot afford legal aid. Now, if you go to prison, most of the people awaiting trial in prisons are very poor people who cannot afford to hire lawyers. So legal aid is critical to prison congestion. Because if you don't have lawyers to move their cases, there's no way their cases will move on. So I think while investing in prison, the government should also focus very heavily on legal aid. Happily, many of the states are introducing their own Office of Public Defender, providing alternatives to legal aid, what legal aid is providing at the moment. But I think we need to do much more to fund legal aid, to fund the Office of the Public Defender, and to ensure that poor people who cannot afford cost of lawyers, are given justice. Justice is not just for the rich, it's also for the poor, and that's very important.